A man stood knee-deep in stagnant basement water, soaked from head to toe. In one hand, he held a wriggling frog in the other, a soggy homeowners association violation slip. The air reeked of moldy timber and defeat. Across from him, Karen Stapleton, clad in designer pajamas that now clung to her like wet tissue, stared in horror. He looked at her, calm and unshaken. "This is your doing," he said flatly. The frog croaked, as if in agreement. Just half a day earlier, Karen had been lounging on her porch, smugly sipping cucumber water while admiring the new gravel-filled trench that had once been my drainage ditch. It had started innocently enough. I was clearing leaves from that small ditch behind my house, the same one I'd maintained for years since buying the place. It wasn't pretty or landscaped, but it did its job. Each summer, it channeled rain runoff from my yard and Karen's slightly elevated property safely into the city's storm drains. Without it, nature had a nasty way of reclaiming the lowest ground, and that happened to be Karen's basement. She either forgot that fact or believed gravity obeyed HOA regulations. When Karen managed to get herself elected president of the Homeowners Association, it was like watching a theater usher decide they should direct the play. Enforcing rules wasn't enough for her. She wanted to rewrite them. She began with minor infractions, some mailbox height discrepancies, lawn ornament purges, and then set her sights on a grander goal, the so-called beautification of the easement. With syrupy conviction, she addressed the HOA board about how unsightly natural ditches were. Her plan? Remove them, cover them, disguise them as nature trails or decorative rock beds. I nearly choked on my coffee when her proposal appeared in a monthly newsletter. A diagram even illustrated a gravel trench in place of my ditch, adorned with ornamental shrubs and a cartoon sun beaming above. Surely, I thought, no one would approve such nonsense. But they did. Within 2 weeks, a crew who looked more like party decorators than landscapers showed up with bright gloves, wheelbarrows, and even a cement mixer. Karen, clipboard in hand, strutted down to my property in yoga pants and smug satisfaction. "The drainage channel," she declared, "doesn't meet neighborhood aesthetic standards." I tried to explain that this wasn't a design feature, it was a crucial hydrological structure. She laughed, winked, and said, "Well, maybe you should put in a pool instead. At least that's useful." That afternoon, the crew boarded up the ditch with plywood, poured in gravel, and planted 2 spindly trees like ceremonial guards. I stood there holding a rake, watching decades of effective water management get buried beneath decorative stones. A few neighbors passed by, some gave me sympathetic looks, others just avoided eye contact. No one said a word to Karen. She had them under her well-manicured thumb. I tried one last time. "Karen, this isn't about appearances. That ditch protects both our homes. If you block it, the water won't disappear, it'll find another path, probably straight into your basement." She waved dismissively. "My foundation's fine. It's sealed. Besides, the HOA voted. It's final." Then, as if to add insult to injury, she handed me a citation. Unauthorized soil disruption, $25. Back on my porch, I stared at the sky. Dark clouds gathered above, thick and threatening. July storms in our area were brutally fast, hot, and unforgiving. A strong system was already pulsing just west of us, its radar signature blinking like a warning light. I thought about reopening the ditch myself, but I knew Karen had installed cameras. Touching her gravel garden would only lead to more finesse or worse. So instead, I documented everything. I took photos, time-stamped video, and noted changes in water flow before and after the so-called improvement. Then I waited. That night, the storm struck. The rain didn't fall, it slammed. Torrents battered roofs, and thunder cracked like bones breaking overhead. I stood beneath my porch awning, dry and quiet, while the water collected in my yard, then surged against the gravel-filled trench that no longer drained. The flood hesitated for a moment, then sought a new route. Gravity pulled it sideways toward Karen's backyard. Her perfectly manicured lawn turned into a disaster zone. Garden gnomes floated past toppled patio chairs. The real chaos began when fog appeared on her basement windows. Moisture was getting in. Lights flickered inside. I heard the faint whine of a shop vac, a desperate attempt to reverse the damage. Then, silence. The next morning, I was sipping coffee when Karen came storming across the street, Her hair was a frizzy halo, pajama pants soaked to the knees, shoes squelching with each step. She waved a dripping piece of paper at me, another HOA citation. "This one meant for me." "This is your fault," she shouted. "You knew this would happen." Without a word, I went into my garage and returned with a city easement map and a thick stack of photos. I handed them to her like a magician revealing his trick. "This was the ditch. This was your project. This was last night." She flipped through the evidence, jaw clenched. "One night witching." From nearby, a neighbor peeked through the blinds. Another one emerged with a rake, pretending to tend the lawn but clearly eavesdropping. Karen's voice dropped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You planned this, didn't you?" I shrugged. "You blocked a drainage ditch in a floodplain." "I'm just letting gravity explain the consequences." Then I added, casually, "You might want to double-check with your insurance." "Damage from negligent landscaping? That's usually not covered." She stared at me in silence, her lips twitching either with rage or the creeping realization that her wallet was about to suffer a disaster of its own. Without another word, she turned and stomped away, puddles splashing around her like little insults. I watched her retreat to her waterlogged kingdom, a queen of crushed gravel, empress of avoidable consequences. A frog leapt from the soggy lawn and landed in her ruined flower bed. It let out a low croak. I could have sworn it sounded like it was laughing. And just like that, it all began: a one blocked ditch, one summer storm, and one HOA president who believed she could overrule the laws of nature with a committee vote. In the flood's wake, a strange hush settled over the neighborhood. People talked, but not to Karen. Her once pristine yard now resembled an episode from a disaster documentary. Mud streaks lined her back steps. Flower beds were shredded by runoff. One of her prized white patio chairs was lodged sideways against a neighbor's fence, looking like a shipwreck. But Karen wasn't ready to surrender. At the next HOA board meeting, she showed up with a printed slideshow and a new villain in mind. Me. According to her, her basement flooded due to unauthorized alterations to the neighborhood's drainage dynamics. In other words, she claimed I deliberately rerouted water to sabotage her property. She threw around terms like malicious hydrological tampering and gross negligence. She even tried to have me barred from attending future board meeting on the grounds of endangering the community. I sat at the back of the room, arms crossed, quietly watching her presentation. One of the slides showed her basement mid-flood, projected on the whiteboard like an exhibit in a courtroom drama. Her voice trembled with self-righteous outrage, narrating each image as though auditioning for a true crime series. Some board members looked uneasy. One finally asked, "Didn't you approve the gravel landscaping over the drainage ditch?" Karen admitted she had, but brushed it off as merely a cosmetic enhancement. Another board member noted that the concrete barrier from her so-called beautification effort was now obstructing a city easement, clearly a violation. Karen dismissed it as a necessary upgrade. I didn't say a word during the entire meeting. I didn't need to. I had already assembled everything for what came next. The following day, I visited City Hall. I met with Mark, a zoning officer with the calm, battle-weary demeanor of someone who spends their days entangling property disputes and neighborhood spats. I laid everything out: original property lines, official easement maps, time-stamped photos of before and after the gravel invasion. Mark studied the images of rocks packed tightly into what was obviously a designed water channel. "Did anyone file construction permits through the HOA?" he asked. "Nope," I replied. "They fined me for objecting." That got his attention. He scribbled notes in a small spiral pad, nodded, and said he'd take a look in person. 3 days later, 2 city inspectors arrived, the clipboards in hand, measuring tools at the ready. They spent the morning evaluating the area behind my home, taking pictures, checking elevation changes, and testing the gravel with metal rods. I observed from my porch. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, glaring daggers. When one inspector politely asked if they could examine her side of the property, she snapped, "Not without a warrant," and slammed the door in their face. The next morning, the HOA received a formal citation: obstruction of a regulated drainage easement. The order was clear: restore the ditch to operational condition within 30 days or face city-imposed penalties. Karen went ballistic. She posted a furious message on the HOA's online bulletin board, accusing the city of targeting her due to neighborhood politics. She even implied that I had bribed the inspectors, an accusation so far-fetched even her most loyal supporters backed away slowly. But I wasn't content with just clearing the ditch. I wanted to know how she'd gotten this far without anyone stopping her. So, I started digging through old HOA records, meeting transcripts, archived newsletters, even publicly available board emails. A pattern emerged. Karen operated on a simple formula: bully, confuse, and outlast. She buried dissenters under jargon and paperwork until they gave up. Most of her proposals passed because no one bothered to show up to vote. When someone did challenge her, she retaliated with citations and passive-aggressive bureaucracy until they either caved or moved away. Her power didn't come from authority, it came from exhaustion. I thought back to when she first arrived in the neighborhood 5 years earlier. She introduced herself with a store-bought pie in one hand and a clipboard in the other, said she wanted to get involved. Karen had said she just wanted to bring order and vision to the neighborhood. At first, everyone thought she was just enthusiastic, eager to help. She started with cheerful initiatives, organizing yard sales, arranging holiday decor, encouraging a sense of community. But then came the mulch. She declared that all front lawns needed to use the same mulch color for consistency. That was the first real red flag. Then came mandates on mailbox design, restrictions on when lawn mowers could be used, and eventually her grand ambition: complete visual control. No detail was too small. Every blade of grass had to conform. The ditch, with its unruly edges and unapologetic purpose, was a blot on her vision, a stubborn piece of nature she couldn't manicure into submission. Then came the twist. One evening, a quiet knock came at my door. It was Denise, a neighbor who lived just 2 doors down from Karen. I barely knew her. She seemed nervous, glancing over her shoulder like she expected security cameras in the bushes. Once inside, she handed me a flash drive. "I used to be on the HOA email list," she said, "before Karen kicked me off. I saved some things." What she handed me was pure gold. The emails on that drive revealed that Karen had long known her basement sat in a natural floodplain. Her realtor had even disclosed previous water damage before she bought the house. There were messages showing Karen had pressured the HOA to downplay flood risks in official documents just to secure a better insurance rate. One email even proposed removing the drainage ditch to improve resale potential by extending her backyard. That was it, the smoking gun. I promised Denise I wouldn't involve her. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. I printed everything and filed it away, slipping the stack into my growing blinder of evidence. Then I made one last call. I reached out to Alan, an old friend, a retired civil engineer, now teaching part-time at the local college. I asked him to write a simple report, explain the ditch's purpose, describe what happens when it's blocked, and outlined how runoff behaves on our neighborhood's terrain. He laughed halfway through my story and had the full report in my inbox 2 days later, complete with diagrams, charts, and soil composition data. It was everything I needed. The day before the city's 30-day deadline expired, Karen sent a mass email to the HOA. She claimed the citation was being appealed and that no one was to interfere with the gravel site until the legal issues were fully adjudicated. The message was filled with vague threats and inflated rhetoric. I replied with 3 attachments: the city's order, Alan's engineering report, and a short, simple line in plain black text: "Any further delay will be treated as obstruction of public infrastructure and documented accordingly." The next morning, I woke to the sound of shovels scraping stone. A professional landscaping crew had arrived, hired by the HOA, likely under city pressure. They began removing the gravel and concrete Karen once called her community beautification masterpiece. Karen didn't come outside. Her car was gone, but her curtains twitched faintly upstairs. I stood with the crew for a bit, talking with the supervisor. He laughed when I mentioned the flood. "Seen this before," he said. "People trying to decorate their way out of a drainage plan. Thing is, gravity doesn't care about design." As they cleared the final layers, a trickle of water from a minor storm earlier that week began to flow again, naturally, smoothly, like an artery unclogged. But this wasn't over. The city was satisfied. The ditch was restored. But the real reckoning was just beginning. Once the neighborhood found out Karen had knowingly put everyone at risk just to hide her own flood vulnerability, once they saw the lengths she went to protect her image at their expense, they weren't going to cower anymore. They were going to be furious. And anger spreads faster than fear. The days before the next storm felt electric, like waiting for the first act of a play no one realized they were starring in. Karen mostly stayed inside, but her presence still hung over the cul-de-sac like a thundercloud. Neighbors started showing up at my door, not just to talk about the ditch but to vent. About years of fines, about mandatory beautification projects, about feeling like they lived under a silent dictatorship wielding a clipboard. Karen's hold on the neighborhood was cracking, the fear was fading, and in its place came stories of quiet frustration, quiet compliance, a broken bar, and now, rising resentment. But Karen wasn't the type to vanish quietly. A few days after the landscaping crew finished, a delivery truck arrived in her driveway. On the flatbed was a large concrete structure labeled, "Decorative Water Feature Base." The delivery crew looked puzzled. So did I. It resembled a short retaining wall or maybe a shallow basin, but nothing decorative about it. That afternoon, I spotted Karen outside with two young Mina, her nephews. I guessed they started assembling the concrete structure near the restored ditch, but instead of working around the drainage, they were rerouting it with rocks, shaping makeshift channels. She was building a dam. To anyone else, it looked like a garden decor, but I could read it like a blueprint. The new layout would hold back water just long enough to keep her yard dry during smaller storms, but the overflow, it would be redirected straight toward my property. It was petty, it was illegal, and it was bold. But what Karen didn't know was that I'd already filed a report with the city. Officials were monitoring the flow. All I needed was proof. So I mounted a weatherproof wildlife camera on a nearby tree pointed directly at her new construction. Motion triggered. Cloud connected. Evidence was my new weapon. I didn't need an argument. I just needed rain. And rain was coming. Forecasts warned of a major system arriving Friday night. I spent the day preparing a clearing debris, reinforcing the ditch with extra stones, checking the gutters. But this time, I added one last step. I waited. Friday night arrived with a humid hush and a teary, greenish sky. Thunder murmured on the horizon. The first drops came after 8. By 8:30, it was a full assault. I sat in my garage, door open, sipping tea and listening to the storm. The water moved fast, rushing through the restored ditch on my side with precision. It worked perfectly, a broken bar, until it hit the new obstruction. The flow slowed, swirled, then backed up. It was like watching a storm surge hit a dam not designed to hold. And just like that, a containment failed. The next moment came fast. 1 second it was under control. The next, the water breached, and this time a broken bar instead of diverting water into my yard as Karen had planned. The sheer volume overwhelmed her makeshift channel. It collapsed. Water surged down the slope, slamming straight into her patio doors. The glass buckled under the pressure and then shattered. At exactly 9:17 p.m., Karen's basement took its second bath of the summer. Water burst through like a waterfall in reverse. Furniture floated. Cardboard boxes dissolved. An extension cord fizzed and sparked before dying in the rising flood. My wildlife camera captured it all. The collapse, the rush, and the moment Karen appeared behind the glass just seconds before the surge. By morning, the damage was undeniable. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy, misty hush behind. Karen's backyard was a swamp. Her once pristine gravel path lay buried beneath mud. The decorative basin had cracked. Her back porch sagged from the force of the water. I stepped to the edge of my property, close enough to see but not to intrude. She saw me. We locked eyes. No words were exchanged. Then she vanished behind her door. But the silence didn't last. That afternoon, a city inspector returned, this time accompanied by someone from the Department of Environmental Services. They carried a printed still from my camera feed. Karen's concrete installation had obstructed a stormwater management path, a serious violation. When they requested access to her yard, she refused, citing privacy and homeowners' rights. That didn't go over well. The city issued a formal warning: comply or face civil penalties, plus an environmental damage citation. Karen didn't show up to the next home meeting. Instead, She sent a written statement through another board member, citing a personal crisis and requesting a leave of absence. But the room had changed. The air had shifted. People weren't afraid anymore. One by one, neighbors shared stories: fines for using the wrong paint color, a new rule banning garden no mess after someone installed a 3-foot frog statue, silencing dissent with obscure bylaws and procedural traps. Her former allies sat stone-faced or quietly slipped away. Then the treasurer read out the financial report. Karen had used discretionary funds for the beautification projecto without full board approval. There were audible gasps. I stayed in the back row, just like always, but I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the catalyst. As the meeting adjourned, 3 neighbors stopped to shake my hand. One grinned and said, "Never thought I'd thank a ditch." I smiled but said little. The truth no longer needed embellishment. The story was telling itself now. Karen had yet to accept responsibility, but her actions were public record, and word had begun to spread beyond the HOA. A local blogger known for exposing HOA horror stories picked up the tally, likely tipped off by a neighbor. I declined an interview, but the post went live anyway, complete with drone footage and quotes from the HOA's own newsletter. The headline was brutal: "Woman floods own home, Mia blames ditch." The comments were savage. And yet, a part of me still wondered, would she try again? Karen had the tenacity of a queen clinging to a ruined castle. But this time, something was different. Her silence was longer, deeper. Her porch light didn't turn on for 11 straight nights. The newsletters stopped. No more fines, no more threats. Just quiet, the kind that follows a thunderclap after the damage is done and there's nothing left to explain. In the evenings, I walked the ditch, cleared debris, reinforced the signs with stone. A few neighbors joined. One brought a rake, another offered to plant erosion-preventing shrubs. It wasn't just about water anymore. It was about reclaiming something quietly stolen: peace, fairness, and the freedom to live without one person's ego looming over everyone. The ditch had done its job, but wise. But more than that, it had exposed the truth. Karen never understood the power of simple things. She believed control came from rules, threats, and a few landscaping tricks. But water doesn't obey newsletters. It doesn't respect uniform gravel or petty vendettas. It flows where it must. And sometimes, that's right through the heart of hypocrisy. Karen's silence wasn't just noticeably, it was growing roots. Her once manicured hedges grew wild. Her flag drooped crooked on its pole for days before someone else straightened it. Her absence was no longer symbolic. It was structural. But even gone, her choices continued to ripple through the community. The blogger's post gained traction. A regional news site picked it up. Soon it landed on a viral Facebook page titled "HOA Madness." The comments poured in, people sharing their own horror stories of HOA tyranny, of board presidents who governed with tape measures and color swatches. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone within 10 blocks knew. She'd become a symbol of everything wrong with HOA power gone unchecked. Meanwhile, the city moved forward with their investigation. The Department of Environmental Services confirmed her DIY water feature had directly contributed to the second flood. Because it disrupted regulated runoff paths, she now faced more than code violations. She faced potential environmental fines. The next time the inspector visited, I was walking my dog. He recognized me immediately and offered a slow, knowing shake of his head. He didn't need to say anything. He'd seen it all before, just not quite like this. When I asked what would happen if she refused to pay, the inspector just shrugged and said, "Liens have a funny way of finding their way onto property records." The neighborhood was buzzing, cautiously hopeful. A few residents started drafting a petition to officially remove Karen from the HOA presidency, even though she hadn't attended a meeting in weeks. Others went door to door gathering accounts of unjust fines and abuses of power. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. People weren't just angry about the ditch anymore. They were re-examining every grievance they'd bottled up during Karen's rule. One couple shared how they were fined for their dog barking during delivery hours, even though their doorbell camera showed Karen provoking it by repeatedly ringing the bell. A single mother recovering from surgery had received 3 citations in 1 month for lack of yard symmetry. These weren't just petty, they were cruel. Eventually, the inevitable happened. An emergency home meeting was called, not by Karen, but by the vice president and 2 other board members. The reason? dereliction of duty and misconduct. This time, the meeting wasn't held in some pre-approved backyard. It took place at the community center, and the turnout was staggering. People who hadn't attended an home meeting in years or ever showed up. Every plastic chair was filled. Dozens stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes forward. The atmosphere was dense with anticipation. I arrived early and sat near the front, and not alone this time. Neighbors who had once whispered their frustrations now sat beside me, nodding in quiet solidarity. The vice president, Glenn, a soft-spoken retired librarian, opened the meeting with a shaky voice and a trembling sheet of paper, but as he read aloud the list of charges and unauthorized spending, unapproved construction, failure to respond to city citations, misinformation in newsletters, his voice steadied. By the time he called for a vote of no confidence, you could hear a pin drop. Hands rose row after row. Even Karen's former supporters kept their arms tightly folded, avoiding eye contact. The vote was unanimous. Karen was officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. She didn't attend the meeting. A formal letter was delivered to her home, requesting she return all home materials and surrender any access to association accounts. No one expected her to comply, but that didn't matter anymore. The power she had wielded through paperwork, intimidation, and procedural gamesmanship had crumbled. In its place, something stronger was taking root: unity. In the days that followed, the acting board began a full audit of HOA finances and policies. A few of us volunteered to help dig through the records. What we found wasn't just negligent, it was embarrassing. Decorations that were never purchased, supplies bought at triple market cost, 2 months' worth of landscaping consultation fees paid to a company registered under Karen's cousin's name. The HOA had been bleeding from the insidia camouflaged with pristine gravel and carefully pruned bushes. One neighbor described it best: "It's like peeling back wallpaper and finding mold." To rebuild trust, the board held a community QA. No agendas, no scripts, just an open room where anyone could speak. It was awkward at first. People fidgeted, some stumbled over their words. Then Clara stood up. "I just want to feel like I belong here again," she said simply. That broke the silence. One by one, neighbors opened up, sharing frustrations, hopes, and even a few laughs. Someone jokingly suggested naming the ditch Karen's Canal. The room erupted in laughter. But the most meaningful moment came when Glenn proposed an idea. He suggested turning the drainage area behind my property into a community-managed green buffer zone with native plants, proper signage explaining its function, and a few benches. It would remain functional but become something more, a quiet symbol of what we had learned together. I smiled, half honored, half amused. "I'll help maintain it," I said, "but only if we don't add a fountain." The laughter this time wasn't just relief, it was release. People were talking again. Yard work turned from a contest into collaboration. Children played freely in the streets without parents casting nervous glances toward Karen's house. That house, once the center of authority, now sat quiet, a little faded, still for sale, a hollow monument to control lost. And the ditch, once a battleground, now marked the start of something better. A disclosure notice now stood by the edge of Karen's property, quiet and unobtrusive, marking the floodplain's history. It was the last visible trace of a rain that had long overstayed its welcome. I found myself spending more time in the backyard, especially after storms. I'd walk the length of the ditch, watching the water flow freely, cutting its natural course with calm precision. Sometimes leaves or small branches would gather at the edges. I'd clear them, not out of duty, but because it felt right. Nature had done its part, so had the community. And for the first time in years, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. One evening, just after sunset, I found a small package on my porch. No note, no label. Inside was a ceramic Froga green, wide-eyed, holding a miniature mailbox. I laughed, a full, unexpected laugh. Whether it came from Clara, Glenn, or someone else didn't matter. It was a thank you, a joke, a quiet, joyful nod to everything that had changed. And so, the story of a simple drainage ditch, the one that toppled a tyrant, found its conclusion. The water had risen twice. It tested our patience, our systems, and our courage. But in the end, it had washed something away. the belief that one person's power was greater than the truth. What remained now was clarity both in water and in purpose. The lesson was simple: keep things clear, let the water flow, and leave no room for the next storm to hide. That final storm came on Tuesday afternoon, with little warning. The forecast mentioned scattered showers, maybe a thunderclap or two. By 4 o'clock, the sky had darkened into a low, growling beast. Wind whipped through the trees, and the air turned thick and restless. I stood at the kitchen window, rain battering the glass, listening to the roar of water racing through the restored ditch. But there was no tightness in my chest this time, no dread, no wondering whether the flood would claim another yard or basement. I knew exactly where the water would go and that it would stay its course. The ditch had become more than a channel. It was a boundary between the chaos we'd endured and the future we were finally ready to build. The storm passed within the hour, leaving behind a road glazed in muddy reflections and scattered branches. But no flooding, and not in my yard, not in anyone's basement, not even, surprisingly, at Karen's. The work of both official and grassroots had held strong, and as I glanced toward Karen's house, I saw something unexpected. She was standing on her back porch, wrapped in a raincoat, watching the water move steadily along the ditch. There was no anger on her face, no clipboard, no exaggerated outrage, just silence. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of understanding. Her house remained for sale, the sign out front slightly crooked from the wind. But she hadn't left. Not yet. Rumors swirled about why something about the public flood disclosures making it hard to find a buyer. The neighborhood had changed too much for her to keep playing the same role, and maybe she knew it. She still didn't speak. Not a wave, not a word, a quiet figure now, a shadow of what once was. Meanwhile, the rest of us moved forward. The Community Green Zone project launched the following week. A few dozen neighbors gathered near the ditch with gloves, mulch bags, and rakes. Someone had donated native wildflowers. I brought iced tea and a folding table. Glenn brought a speaker and played soft jazz while we worked. Kids chased butterflies and carried watering cans like they were badges of honor. There was laughter, there was sweat. Most importantly, there was unity. For the first time in years, people had come together for something that didn't involve compliance notices or fines. One of the last people I expected to see that day was Denise, the neighbor who had slipped me the flash drive all those months ago. She'd kept to herself since then. But that morning, she showed up carrying a small bronze plaque. She didn't say much, just handed it over and nodded. Etched into the metal were the words, Community Resilience Project, reclaimed by neighbors, restored by nature. We mounted it on a post in the center of the ditch bank. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't official, but it meant everything. Someone suggested we hold a small, informal ceremony to mark the transformation, a quiet recognition of what was once dismissed as an eyesore. No fanfare, no permits, just a loose circle of neighbors standing together, swapping stories in the golden afternoon light. Glenn gave a short speech. It was simple, heartfelt. He thanked everyone not just for cleaning up the mess, but for helping mend something far older and far more fractured, our sense of community. He never mentioned Karen by name. He didn't have to. His words rang clear. Real power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It belongs to the people who show up. In the weeks that followed, change settled in, and not as a dramatic shift, but as a series of steady, deliberate habits. The HOA began posting monthly financial reports online. Meetings, once dreaded, became something people actually looked forward to. They came not out of fear, but out of genuine curiosity and even hope. A young couple proposed a monthly garden swap. Another neighbor floated the idea of a fall block party. Events that once would have been dismissed as distractions under Karen's rigid rule were now seen for what they were, opportunities to connect. Without her control looming over us, the neighborhood finally had room to breathe. Even long-standing tensions began to ease. I overheard one man quietly apologizing to another for having ignored his concerns about a noise citation years ago. I was scared of getting fined too, he admitted. That kind of honesty caught like fire in the best way. People began to forgive, not to forget, but to move forward. We weren't just remembering what had gone wrong, we were remembering how to make things right. Truthfully, we'd all been complicit in some way through our silence, our hesitation, our convenience. But that chapter was closed. As for me, I kept tending the ditch. It became a quiet ritual. Every few days, I'd walk its length, clear out branches, check for erosion, shift the stones to help the flow. Sometimes neighborhood kids would tag along, curious about what I was doing. I'd explain it the same way my father once explained rivers to me. It's not just about where the water goes, it's about how you let it move. Give it space. Don't force it into something it's not. One boy called me the ditch whisperer. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my gloves. Then one day, the for sale sign at Karen's house quietly disappeared. No announcement. No moving truck. Just a freshly mowed lawn and closed curtains. Rumor had it she'd pulled the listing. Whether she planned to stay or simply regroup, no one really knew. But by then, it didn't matter. She wasn't the storm anymore, just a shadow of it. The power she once wielded so tightly had been absorbed back into the roots of the very community she tried to control. Now, she was just another homeowner, subject to the same rules she once weaponized. And so, summer turned to fall. Leaves began to change. The air thinned. Rain softened. The ditch, now lined with goldenrod and soft ferns, flowed gently through the heart of our neighborhood. It had seen conflict. It had seen control, deceit, resistance. But now, it carried something else, something cleaner, redemption. It still amazes me that all of this began with one small, careless act, a pile of decorative gravel dumped over a ditch no one had given a second thought to until it was gone. Karen's downfall didn't come from the storm. It came from her belief that she could outmaneuver the simple, immutable laws that govern both nature and people. Water finds a way. People, when given the chance, will choose truth over tyranny. And nature in land, in spirit, in the collective will, it will always reclaim what's been taken from it, given time. The ditch didn't just carry runoff, it carried away fear. It flushed out the lies, the manipulations, the weight we'd all shouldered in silence for too long. And on one final evening, before the frost of winter arrived, I stood at its edge and watched the shallow current glisten in the last orange light of dusk. I knew, then, without a doubt, this neighborhood would never go back to what it was. It didn't need to. It had become something stronger, kindred, truer, all because of one forgotten ditch, and the truth it refused to bury.